Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tip. My name is Julian, and in today's episode, we're talking about the New York Rangers, their noteworthy players, and whether I think you should consider drafting them in this video. Now, the Rangers have lost a couple of kind of important pieces for their playoff run last year. They lost Andrew Kopp, they lost Frank Petrano, and they lost Ryan Strome. But they have added a really good second-line center in Vincent Trocheck. So how do I think they're going to look this year, and what do I think about drafting each of their top guys? Stay tuned, and I will talk about all of that later in the video. Now, because the Rangers have so many fans, there are a lot of players who are being overvalued in fantasy, a little bit, which is why you have to be wary of those values and make sure that you don't fall into the trap of drafting these players too early. I'll get into that a little bit later in the video. Now we're going to continue a little fun trend that I started in my New Jersey Devils video. With this jersey behind me, who do you think is the player attached to this jersey? Whose name is on the back of this jersey? Let me know down in the comments and I'll let you know if you're correct. Now before we get started, guys, please leave a like, hit the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. And if you do want to take your support to the next level, the link to my Patreon is down in the description. Now let's jump right into it, and let's start with the Rangers lines that I am projecting for this year. On the top line, we have Cris Kreider, Mika Zibanejad, and Alexis Lafreniere. On the second line, Artemi Panarin, Vincent Trocheck, and Kaapo Kakko. On the third line, Sammy Blais, Filip Chytil, and Vitaly Kravtsov. Let's jump into the noteworthy players now for the Rangers, and first on the list is Igor Shesterkin, currently going at an ADP of 8.9, and Igor Shesterkin is a phenomenal goalie. Won the Vezina last year, 6 shutouts, 36 wins for the Rangers, was absolutely incredible, and I expect him to have another very, very good season and definitely compete for that Vezina trophy again. That being said, I personally don't think it's a great idea to draft goalies in the first round of your fantasy drafts. You're going to want one of the top forwards that are available to you. Goalies you can get a little bit later, almost the same caliber, right? Like you can get UC Saros, Jacob Markstrom, guys like that just a couple rounds later that are going to do almost as well as Igor Shesterkin, and then you're going to miss out on top guys, like Mikko Rantanen's, Kirill Kaprizov. Like you don't want to miss out on these kind of players, and that's why I don't suggest drafting Vasilevskiy or Shesterkin in the first round of your drafts. However, if that is your strategy, or you're in a really, really goalie-heavy league that really, there's a lot of weight on goalies, then maybe it's worth it for you. But personally, I'm going to be avoiding Vasilevskiy and Shesterkin in the first round of my draft. Then I have Adam Fox, who obviously is one of the best defensemen in the league, had 74 points in 78 games last year. Now, Adam Fox is an incredible defenseman, but he's a good example of a Rangers player being valued a little bit too early. He is an incredible defenseman, but only finished as the 13th best fantasy defenseman last year. He's currently being drafted as the 3rd best fantasy defenseman, which obviously, compared to how he did last year, is a little bit too high. Obviously, he's going to put up those crazy point numbers, but the peripherals aren't that crazy for Adam Fox. He puts up some really good block shots numbers, but he doesn't really hit, and the shots on goal is significantly lower than a lot of the guys that are better than him in fantasy for defensemen. Guys like Hedman, Letang, they all shoot the puck a lot more than Adam Fox, and that's why his value is a little bit lower, and that's why I don't necessarily recommend drafting Adam Fox at an ADP of 17.4. That's just a little bit too high for me. Then I have Artemi Panarin, who had himself a really nice season for his personal standard, 96 points in 75 games. Really, really good offensive season for Artemi Panarin. The thing is, his shots numbers just weren't that high, which is why he only finishes the 41st best fantasy player in terms of fantasy points per game. Now, because of this, and because of the fact that he doesn't really put up other peripherals, he's not super worth drafting at 24th overall. But I don't absolutely hate drafting him here either. I think that he definitely could live up to this position, but if he does play like last year, he's going to finish a few spots lower, but definitely not the worst draft pick, and especially if you're in a categories league and you just need a guy who's going to put up a whole bunch of points for you and fill up those categories, Panarin's definitely not a bad pick for you. And then I have Cris Kreider, who's currently going on an ADP of 26.7. Last year, he finished as the 24th best fantasy player, so obviously that ADP seems to make sense on the surface. Scored 77 points, of which 52 of those were goals. So he absolutely was insane in letting it up last year, scoring so many goals left and right. Now, if you look at that shooting percentage, it's 20.2, which seems extraordinarily high, right? And I was thinking that a lot last season, like, man, this shooting percentage has got to come down at some point, right? But it never did. And he actually has been able to maintain that shooting percentage for 2 seasons now. Last year, he was at a 20% shooting percentage, and the year before, he was at 19 point something, and that's just really, really high. Now, the reason he's been able to maintain that shooting percentage is because the power play in New York is just so good. And because of that, he's probably going to be able to keep that going. Last year, they had Strome on the power play, and this year, Vincent Trocheck is going to be taking that spot on centering the power play instead of Strome, and I think Trocheck is going to be even better than Strome there, and I think that power play is going to continue to flourish in New York and continue to be absolutely deadly. And with the dual eligibility, even though there's a chance that that shooting percentage does regress a little bit, the dual eligibility definitely makes him a safer pick, and that's why I think it actually is worth drafting Cris Kreider in this range. Then I have Mika Zibanejad, who scored 81 points in 81 games. Obviously a very good season, was a plus 30, 219 shots on goal, so he definitely had a nice shot volume, and I think that Mika Zibanejad is one of the best players in the NHL. That being said, he is locked in as a center, so he's a natural center, which is not super valuable in fantasy. And last year, he only finished as the 43rd best player in terms of fantasy points per game. So why is he going at an ADP of 29.2? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. If he has a similar season to last year, he's not going to live up to that ADP, and he's a natural center, so it just makes him less valuable, which is why personally I'm not drafting Mika Zibanejad, at least not in this range. If he falls towards the 40-50 range, then I'm definitely picking him up. But here, I don't think he's the best bang for your buck. All right, then I have Jacob Trouba, who I have ranked as the 14th best defenseman this year. I absolutely love him. There's nothing more I can say than that. Trouba is someone that I'm definitely going to be going after in a lot of drafts this year. He's someone who scores points, gets hits, gets block shots, and gets shots on goal. He's a peripheral monster, and he's someone that I absolutely want to have on my team this year, and you should too. All right, then I have Vincent Trocheck, who scored 51 points in 81 games last year, and something that people don't always realize about Trocheck is he actually hits a fairly decent amount. So if you're in a hitting league, I think Trocheck is pretty decent value. Managed to finish the 102nd best fantasy player in terms of fantasy points per game, just because he gives you that safe floor night in and night out with hits, and he also shoots the puck a decent amount as well. Now, Trocheck is now on the New York Rangers and probably will be playing with Artemi Panarin. I think he's pretty good value here. Obviously, he's a natural center, so obviously he is going to be going significantly later than his ADP, but he's going about 50 spots later than where he finished last year, so it's a pretty good value if you do need a natural center at this point in the draft. Next, I have Alexis Lafreniere, and will this finally be the year for Alexis Lafreniere to show off why he was the #1 overall pick in 2020? I think it finally might be. Things are trending up for him. He had a really good playoff run, looked really solid. And it looks like this year he might finally get that top line spot alongside Kreider and Zibanejad. Obviously, he'll be playing right wing, which is not his preferred side, but I think he's going to have himself a nice year there. Obviously, he's going really late in the draft, and he has dual eligibility. So at this range, I'll gladly take a chance on Alexis Lafreniere and see if he can break out this year. Then I have K'Andre Miller, and I absolutely love K'Andre Miller. He's one of my favorite players in the NHL. Super fun to watch on the ice. But guys, last year he only scored 20 points in a full 82-game season. And yeah, his hits numbers were pretty nice as well, but come on, guys. He's not suddenly going to become a 40 or 50-point scorer. He's not really that valuable in fantasy. He finishes the 356th player in terms of fantasy points per game, which just isn't good enough to be having on your fantasy team. As much as you might love the guy, don't draft him in fantasy. Same thing with Filip Chytil. Last year only scored 22 points in 67 games and is slated to be the third line center this year. And the third line from New York is okay, but is nothing too special. And last year he finished as the 523rd best player in terms of fantasy points per game. Come on, why are you guys drafting him here? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Even if Kravtsov is added to his line, Kravtsov looks really solid. Still don't think Chytil's going to have that much value, which is why I'm not going to be drafting him this year. Then I have Kaapo Kakko, who was obviously a second overall pick a few years ago. And he's good on the ice, but he's not really super crazy offensively. He only scored 18 points in 43 games last year. And this year, he is slated to play on line with Trocheck and Panarin, which is a pretty good spot. But I'm going to have to see him actually produce to believe it, because last year, he wasn't particularly good. And finished as the 469th best player in terms of fantasy points per game, which just isn't good enough. And then last but not least, I have Barclay Goodrow, who scored 33 points in 79 games last year, hit a decent amount, which gives him a little bit of a safe floor. But guys, he's going to be a fourth liner, and there's very little reason to have him on your team, unless there's some injuries in New York and maybe he moves up the lineup, in which case I'll consider streaming him. But for now, definitely not considering drafting Barclay Goodrow. And that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. Please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and if you do want to take your support to the next level, the link to my Patreon is down below. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.